Sawadee krap. Sawadee krap. My name is Thitinan Pongsutheerat. I am the director of the Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University, based at the Faculty of Political Science. This is our third webcast now. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And if there are any glitches in the recent past or in this one and in the near future, please accept my apologies. It's still novel to us to do this kind of public forum online, but we're getting a bit more accustomed to it. So I hope that it'll be better and better. So today, before I get to the topic, I just want to report a little bit. Doing online webcasts takes a lot of imagination. I have to imagine, even though I'm in a room by myself, speaking to an audience. They're out there scattered in different parts, in fact, not just in Thailand, but also in the region and maybe beyond. It's an imagined public forum online for me in a way. We've had two webcasts. First, we had one on the COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis, and ASEAN as an organization. And then last Friday, we had one on Thailand and Southeast Asia, COVID-19. Both have been going from strength to strength, if you will, in terms of audience participation. We had more than 500 viewership in the first, and maybe about 100 live. Joining the live feed, the live stream. The second one last time with Dr. Zachary Abuza, we had about 94 live stream, like as we're doing now. But subsequently, there have been over 1,100 viewers who have tuned in to the recording. So as a third webcast, now we are shifting gear a little bit. Focusing on the Thai economy now, during and after the coronavirus crisis. There's a bit of time change. At first, we wanted to stick to the usual ISIS public forum time, which is 9:30 a.m. To 11:30 a.m. in person. But as a webcast, I was aiming for 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. We had two of those. But today, we changed it to Thursday, and also shifting it to the afternoon because one of our speakers had an urgent meeting that could not be rescheduled. So nevertheless, we're here now in the afternoon from 3:30 to 5 p.m. I also will say again that questions and comments are very much welcome. We will start to incorporate comments about midway through the webcast. You may post your comments on the ISIS Thailand Facebook. And next time, I hope that we also will have the webcast feeding through YouTube. So for those who do not use Facebook that much, we also will have a YouTube facility in the near future. Today, the topic is the Thai economy. We're looking at coronavirus crisis, looking to counting the cost and looking for some kind of recovery, the Thai economy after COVID-19. But to talk about Thai economy after COVID-19, we also have to talk about Thai economy now as the virus is ongoing and still unfolding. I have two guest speakers today. They are leading economists of Thailand, I can say. Let me first introduce them. Normally, you would have speaker bios with you in person if you were to come to an ISIS public forum at Chulalongkorn University. But since we're online, I will briefly read the highlights of their speaker bios. We have two speakers, Dr. Supawut Saichua and Dr. Suthapa Amornviwatt. Let me first just highlight Sawadee krap, Dr. Supawut krap, Dr. Suthapa. Dr. Supawut Saichua is currently advisor of Kiatnakin Financial Group. He was the managing director of Patra Capital Public Company, and also was the managing director and head of research at Patra Securities. Prior to joining Patra in May 1994, he was a diplomat. He was a rising up-and-coming diplomat and rose to become the director of the South Pacific Division of the Department of American and South Pacific Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand in the early 1990s. In addition, Dr. Supawut was also appointed advisor to the Minister of Finance in 2001. He also served as Deputy Secretary General to the Prime Minister for Political Affairs in 1997, with government experience in economic and political issues, including privatization of public enterprises. Dr. Supawut received his Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in economics from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, and a PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii at Manoa in 1984. Let me just highlight briefly Dr. Sutapa, our second speaker. Dr. Sutapa Amornviwat, who has a PhD. She is a founding CEO of SCB Abacus, SCB being Siam Commercial Bank. This is an AI, artificial intelligence powered data tech startup under SCB, where she previously headed the Economic Intelligence Center, EIC, and the Risk Analytics Division. Dr. Sutapa currently sits on Public Sector Audit and Evaluation Subcommission, overseeing the development of Thailand's Eastern Economic Corridor. And she's also on the Executive Committee of the Asian Institute of Technology. Before Siam Commercial Bank, Dr. Sutapa founded TMB Analytics, TMB being a Thai military bank, and Risk Analytics and Research Group at the TMB Bank during her secondment from the ING Group. Prior to joining the banking industry, Dr. Sutapa was an economist based at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. She holds an AB from Harvard University, PhD from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. She was a recipient of Thailand's most prestigious King Scholarship and a representative of Thailand in the 23rd International Chemistry Olympiad. In 2007, Dr. Sutapa was honored by the Asia Society as an Asia 21 Young Leader Fellow. So those are some of the highlights and details of the backgrounds of the two speakers. Now, if I may just preface this discussion, we would like to kind of be as natural as we can be and as in person as we can be, even though we're online, so we have to do a lot of imagination. I would like to begin by just sort of laying out the ground a little bit. I mean, we have, this coronavirus crisis is devastating. I mean, it's just amazing. It's astonishing what's happening, how lives have been disrupted. We're working from home, and this is a phenomenon unseen, unheard of in our lifetime. But be that as it may, we are making adaptations, adjustments, and so on. So let me just start off by showing a few slides, if I may, just to highlight where we are. So we can see this is the coronavirus tracker. We can see that I actually have a PowerPoint clicker here, if I could. There's always a delay. Our viewers at home, please do not be alarmed if there's a bit of a pause, a second or two, maybe even longer pause, because that's just how it works. So it's not like you're being ignored or I'm being ignored. It's just how we have to communicate these days. So the tracker, you can see Thailand actually is doing pretty well compared to the other countries. I think Thailand is number 54, 55 now among almost 200 countries. And the curve in Thailand is actually flattening a bit. And I hope that we will be able to discuss with Dr. Sutapa a little bit about sort of the reopening of parts of the Thai economy and society as the curve flattens. And you can see here, the US actually a lot of worry, a lot to be concerned about. The curve, I mean, the slope is pretty upward sloping, pretty steep. Italy was problematic before, but now the US is our big worry. China has kind of brought it under control. Japan is showing a spike. Singapore is showing a big spike. But Thailand looks very manageable now. And if we go further, we can see that in Thailand, the numbers actually, today there's one more death. Someone actually with also additional complications. 50 dead so far, and a lot of recoveries, and the numbers are increasing at a diminishing rate. And here we can see, as a result, the IMF has come up with forecast projections of different trajectories of growth and actually contractions in Asia and the US and Europe. In Asia, Thailand is not looking great. The contraction this year is supposed to be about 6.7%. Even the Bank of Thailand is looking at 5% range. There's no question, I think, by all accounts, that the Thai economy this year will contract. So what we're looking at going forward now, if I may go to Dr. Supawut Saichira, Dr. Supawut has followed, analyzed Thai economy for more than 3 decades, and he's been known as an independent economist, and his views are taken very seriously by the markets, by the media. You've seen, I think, in 1997, 1998, Dr. Supawut, the crisis back then, the financial sector crisis, compounded by the currency crisis. We had a full-blown economic crisis in 1997, 1998. Contractions in both years. Prior to that, Thai economy expanded over 6% a year. So 1997, I think minus 2.4, and then 1998, a contraction of about 8%. This time, that's our benchmark that we can maybe look in our context to understand what kind of crisis, economic crisis we're seeing this year and next year. Are we looking at a recovery, Dr. Supawut, in terms of a V-shaped recovery? Would it be a U-shape, maybe a deep contraction and adverse environment for some time before some kind of recovery, or maybe double dip, or maybe even an L shape in the worst case, meaning that it dips and it stays down. So what kind of recovery, what are some of the dynamics that you can see from the Thai economy during and after COVID-19? And also maybe you can address a little bit for us. I think the public sentiment is shifting a little bit. A month ago, we were very afraid of the virus. We still are, but I think that after almost a month of lockdown, curfews, and quarantine, self-isolation, social distancing, all these measures now, we're seeing some good results, some promising results. So now the sentiment seems to be shifting now towards some kind of a balance between reopening some parts of the economy while maintaining some vigilance over the COVID-19. So maybe you can address for us, Dr. Supawut, the kind of recovery we can expect, that we can anticipate, and maybe how we can draw a balance between public health concerns and also economic well-being. Dr. Supawut.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kittinan. I very much welcome this chance to come and talk with you and the participants. Let me say this, going back to the crisis in 1997, that was a different crisis to this one. In that case, it was an economic problem, and therefore you could have economic solutions. In other words, back then, the main problem was we were running out of foreign reserves. We borrowed money from the IMF, and therefore we could basically fill that hole up. Although the IMF, of course, required many tough conditions to deflate what was a property and a financial sector bubble. So the point was that was an economic problem, property, financial bubble, and current account deficits, and subsequently loss of reserves. This time, the pace of recovery, unfortunately, will be dictated by COVID-19. It doesn't have a straightforward economic solution. Let me go into a little bit more detail here to conceptualize the issue here. What we've done globally was to lock down the economies of the world. In so doing, GDP is not being produced. GDP is the stream of goods and services that are produced by the productive sectors in the economy. We told everyone to stay home, so no GDP gets produced, right? So if you want to ask me how would the economy recover, how would GDP recover, you have to open up. Some people ask a related question. Well, if the government puts in enough money, if the Federal Reserve or the central banks pump in a lot of liquidity, could that push up GDP? The short answer, the real answer is no, it cannot. If you think about it, when the Fed, for example, put in liquidity, short-term loans, buying bonds, and the like, to the tune of about $4 trillion US, equivalent to 20% of US GDP, what are they actually doing? Are they actually increasing GDP? My answer is not really, because GDP is produced by people who go out to work and produce things. Planes fly, restaurants open up, people cut hair. Jerome Powell doesn't cut hair. So you do not really increase GDP by injecting liquidity in the system when you shut it down. So what does injection of money achieve? What it does achieve is it tries to keep business in business. It tries to make sure that companies don't go bankrupt. It tries to make sure that the companies have some money to pay employees, so they don't have to liquidate, and employees don't have to basically run out of money to pay electricity bills and so on and so forth. So it always comes back to, when can you reopen the economy? Even government spending doesn't do the job of increasing GDP, because by the same token, the government does not fly planes. Let me give you a specific example in Thailand. You've seen news where the Thai airlines have asked the government for soft loans of about 25 billion billion baht, so that they can stay in business. Suppose the government answer their call. What does the government do? The government actually issue new bonds to sell to the public who are unwilling to buy bonds from the airlines, and then the government gives them the loans. What do the airlines do? They use that soft loan, supposedly, to keep themselves in business, pay some of their employees. But are they viable? Not as long as you close the airports and don't allow the planes to fly. So it comes back to, you have to let the planes eventually fly. The airlines can eventually generate revenue. So we are here today in Thailand trying to find ways to reopen the economy to some sort of normalcy. How can that be achieved? Well, there have to be preconditions. As you know, the preconditions are, you must flatten the curve, and Thailand apparently has done that. To have maybe 10, 20, 30 new cases per day is enormously doable in terms of opening things up. And even if you have a little bit more new cases, you could cope, because you know from statistics everywhere that if you have maybe 30, 40 new cases, chances are most of them, 80% of them, will have mild symptoms and therefore do not need much further treatment. Whereas only about 20% might need more hospital treatment, and of those, maybe half would need serious hospital treatment. That is immensely treatable given the capacity that we have right now. But obviously, the important thing is, once you open things up, you do have to aggressively, in my view, do proactive testing of potential new cases to make sure that once they are identified, quickly identified, then you could trace their whereabouts and their contacts, so that you can isolate those people and therefore minimize any need to treat new cases. Bottom line, what we as economists would like to see is the government telling us today that they will lift this semi-lockdown, say within a week, and tell exactly what that lockdown easing involves. What can firms do? What can firms not do? Where can they do it? And what will happen as time goes by? Now, this is very important, this time frame, this plan, because then the companies can start to do the things that they would try to do, try to figure out how they could survive, how they could pay the employees, whether they are profitable or not. That is a huge uncertainty, and therefore I cannot predict how much it will cost in terms of GDP loss, because we don't even know what they can or cannot do. But first things first, the government has to come out and tell us date certain, when can they start doing things, what can they do. And obviously we have to be guided by the public health experts on that count. Now there are several proposals apparently out there in the public which give some sort of a guidance in regards to those activities and so on. We have to try them. We have to go ahead. And there could be mistakes. As you mentioned yourself, you have a case of Singapore and other places where there have been surges in new cases. So you have to be agile, you have to be nimble to adjust policy. But the show must go on. Let me stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Kappa. That's very good, kind of laying the ground, I think, for our discussion this afternoon. I mean, let me just pick up on a couple of points quickly before I proceed to Dr. Sutapa, who is likely to be able to share with us some of the dynamics and the considerations about reopening. Dr. Supawut, you mentioned in terms of 1997, 1998 in Thailand, and 2008, 2009 in the US and Europe, and the global financial crisis, so-called. What we're seeing in this crisis for the Thai economy and other economies, I think, is it correct to say it is much more broad-based within the economy itself? So 1997, 1998, perhaps it was financial sector focused. Maybe that's an area, I mean, it's kind of concentrated within the financial sector. There was some cascading effects. But a lot of people went back to the farms, to the countryside. There was some shock absorbers from the agriculture sector. But this time, it looks to me like this is very broad-based. No one is spared. No one is spared, and there's no place to kind of seek cushion and comfort from, like 1997, 1998. And in another analogy, 2008, 2009, there was a lot of fiscal injection, the quantitative easing, massive fiscal boost, and can you do that? I mean, can the US and EU do that kind of scale and scope of fiscal rescue? Again, do they have that kind of space? It sounds to me like your answer is no. That we cannot fire that kind of ammunition twice in 12 years. And this means for the world economy, we're looking at some very sharp contraction that has a wide coverage, not just the financial sector, but and the banks and so on, but in the real economy and real lives, and people who perform menial labor also will be affected, right down to the farm. So this is something, if so, we don't want to be alarmist, but I think we also have to be realistic about the sharp contraction to come and how broad-based it will be. And second, you mentioned the balance between the public health and economic well-being. And do you see what would be your priority sectors in terms of partial reopening? I mean, we can assume that the precautions on social distancing, stringent measures on keeping a distance, on hand washing, on other hygiene procedures will be heightened. But in terms of the different sectors, I mean, do you have a kind of priority areas that we could be looking at, Dr. Supawut? Two quick questions here. The broad-based nature of this crisis and priority areas for reopening.
Thank you, Dr. Thitinan. Those are very perceptive questions. Let me go back to the financial crisis in 1997 in Thailand. That was a rich man's crisis, I would argue. The big companies mostly, and the banks were over leveraged, and we were stoking up a property bubble. And as a result, when things collapsed, a lot of banks have to be recapitalized, property companies as well. But obviously there were people hit. I think unemployment rate, the number of people unemployed went up to about 1 million, if I remember correctly. But they had sectors to go to because the baht devalued, and therefore you could have gone to the farming sector where we export. We are net exporters of food, so there was definitely a big cushion there. And back then the agricultural sector was something like 20% of GDP. This time it's probably closer to 10% of GDP, much better. The 2009 crisis in the US, I think it was basically a financial virus. It was the CDO and CDS that got people, that got companies and big banks afraid of transacting with each other, not knowing which banks had CDO, had been afflicted with those financial virus. So the Fed could basically mitigate those problems by injecting enough liquidity and saying, don't worry, if you need the liquidity, come and get it from me. Fast forward to now, we're dealing with a real virus that in terms of macroeconomic policy cannot contain people's well-being relative to the companies have to repay. So you have to ease that lockdown. There is no way around it. The issue becomes how do you move this process forward? I think in a way that tries to maintain some degree of normalcy. And then, as I said, first thing be a right market. You would like to open up, would like to try the market, but they will be all faced with very, very difficult demand conditions. People will still be afraid to go out, to go and do what they used to do. So there will be a period, I would argue, over the next several months of relative deflation, or basically supply exceeding demand. People will still try and fail. Businesses will try and fail to try to regain profitability, to try to maintain employment. So that's where the government again has to be very agile and see what they can do to help. You ask about priority sectors. Here again, there are two issues. Obviously, you want to help the small, the SMEs, the relatively small operators who will likely have very limited financial cushion. You would like to help low-income people, but at the same time, some of these businesses might be more riskier, than otherwise. There are even, I would argue, gray economy, massage parlors, gambling dens that do exist in Thailand. Those are going to need to be cracked down, I think, severely, because there are places where the virus could spread. And that would take out from GDP. I don't know what the amount is, but the estimate out there is, say, maybe about 10, even 20% of GDP is right then and there. How do you redeploy those resources? Not to mention the tourism that you also mentioned is another sector that had been Thailand's engine of growth. That sector, as we talked earlier, was planning to accommodate 40 million foreign tourists a year with a 5% increase annually. Now it's more likely than not that you will have maybe 20 million, if not less than that. So how do you pick winners and losers? How do you redeploy those assets? Where do you redeploy those assets? I think those are some of the key questions going forward for Thailand.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Supawut. Now let me proceed to Dr. Sutapa. In the meantime, Dr. Supawut, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, if I could ask you, we had a bit of glitches on the internet line from perhaps possibly your side. So maybe if you can double check that for me, that would be appreciated. Dr. Sutapa, from your perspective, I mean, you've seen from a tech point of view, data analytics, and your own take on the Thai economy itself. We're looking at some very ominous numbers. They're talking about unemployment, different sources of 7 million unemployed. That's never seen in Thailand before. Normally, we have seasonal to less than 1%, negligible almost unemployment. This is massive unemployment if we're looking at 7 million, even up to 10 million. And then the adverse effects on the hospitality sector, tourism, travel. I mean, Thailand is services driven. And then the double challenge of trying to reopen and restart some of the engines of the Thai economy. What do you think? How are we dealing with this Thai economy itself? Your outlook on the Thai economy during and after, and what to be done in your view, and including your involvement, your advice to the public sector agencies on this note.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank ISIS Institute of Security and International Studies to allow me to be part of this forum and to share the views on what the adjustment should be regarding the COVID-19 pandemic that's affecting us. I certainly do agree with the views from most economists, and particularly leading by Dr. Supawut's idea that the economic damage from this prolonged lockdown would eventually become a long-term public health and feared to be even bigger than the pandemic itself. And we just have to understand the cycle in which it would affect life. First of all, it would be because of the long lockdown, it's a demand shock. And then the global trade will start to manifest itself into the supply, the reduction in global trade will manifest itself into the supply chain disruption. And then the rising unemployment would feed back into the demand shock due to the lockdown. So a lot of the questions is asking whether the rising unemployment or this demand shocks is actually holding back the economic upgrade or the tech reskilling that we had originally planned, or that's what we need. But I feel that indeed this kind of crisis, or in fact any kind of crisis, actually bring about a sharper focus on what we did not do enough during the good times. So when we look at what Thailand did, we fare quite okay on the security of basic necessities like food and shelter, but severely inadequate in security on medical supplies and services. And that's probably coming from insufficient competition in the healthcare industry and also limited capacity. On top of that, we also rely a lot, and actually most of our medical supply through imports. In the past, Thai government, academia, healthcare industry alike have long neglected domestic investment in fundamental research, favoring for more price competitive pharmaceutical products from imports. And there is an obvious reason for it, because such fundamental research does not generate results that have immediate applications or commercialization. But this knowledge or insights or asset cannot be built overnight, especially not during episodes of global pandemic. So case in point is the real-time PRC kit to detect COVID-19. Hence, we are at the mercy of manufacturing countries of the test kits. So I would like us to look back, during the good time. This system has been very hard to reform, but crises like this actually brings the problem quickly to light. And I do hope that our talks about more resilient, responsive, effective healthcare and pure research will become much more in into discussions and into fruition after this pandemic subsides. So on the other side, crisis can also highlight our strengths, and it's probably time to rethink and rebuild as we await demand to return. So now, if we look from the perspective of the government, from a perspective of a corporate, now that demand is not as fast-paced as before, it's time to look back into your the problem that you have not done well and what you can do more. One sector that which we had played to our fundamental strength is in food and agriculture, and we have not done enough because little investment was ever made to upgrade productivity in the agricultural sector. Most of the past government policies only focus on price, meaning subsidy and guarantee scheme, rather than transforming agriculture into precision farming, making use of data such as aerial images, or upgrading the sector into secondary and tertiary food industry. We also talking a lot about creative industry, and we have yet to see how our IT innovation have saved the day. But so far, we have been that Thai tech community has been quite good at tinkering. So going forward, if we learn from the experience that we are living it now, shall we not enable innovation to open source development instead of closed source proprietary form as we have been in the past, and allowing a larger network of developers, smaller developers in society to learn from one another? So these are some of the things that I wish we or we see a lot of development in Thai society. So going back to your original questions regarding reskills, I think business are now and consumer are also now have a better sense of what can and cannot be done in their original format, and also moving into the post-COVID situation. So I think for small company, even the young company will still need to change, and we start seeing a lot of adjustment in terms of the linkage of infrastructure, the data system up into cloud. A lot of the people would have to be on the mobile device, and also the change has become now ingrained in culture. We saw that a traditional gin distillery being repurposed to produce hand sanitizers overnight. Now is actually a good moment for business to assess their capabilities and how they can leverage, how can they leverage or complement with new technologies that leads to new business opportunities outside of their comfort zone. And in fact, from the public sector side, we have certainly seen a positive change that would have been impossible under normal circumstances, like online conference, streamlined transactions, digital documents. These has been in talk forever, but have never really been put into place in the last few weeks like we have seen recently. So in a way, I absolutely agree. This is devastating impact on the society. It will have a long-term impact in terms of economic, social, and the shift of political power. But there are also some positive side coming out of this pandemic, and this is time to rethink and re-strategize.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sutapa. Just a very quick follow-up, a couple of points and questions. You mentioned, what you're saying basically, this is an opportunity, it's a crisis, it's a devastating, deep crisis that still has some way to run. It still has a long course to run. However, eventually, there will be opportunities to come out of this crisis. And some of those opportunities will involve some of the reforms that we've been long looking for in Thailand. A lot of structural reforms of the economy, a lot of innovation that we need. So just a couple of things. First, there's a common saying now, it's almost a cliche, that life won't be the same after COVID-19, right? So we've heard this again and again, but in concrete terms, I'm thinking, there'll be change and there'll be continuity. There'll be some things that change for a short time, temporarily during this time, and then eventually, longer term, they'll go back to what we saw before COVID. But there'll be some changes during this time that will be more permanent and long lasting. So, for example, I'm thinking this kind of online learning, online, reskilling, upskilling that I've seen. Some of this will be long lasting. The airlines, for example, I mean, eventually we will take to the skies again. We have to, a lot of business people will have to travel. They have to still meet face to face and so on. But maybe the planes will be reconfigured for more space. Maybe it'll charge a little bit more for distancing. I don't know. But from your view, I mean, and you work with big data and you come across a lot of analytics and so on. Maybe you can give us just a sense, not comprehensively, but just a sense of what kinds of long-term lasting changes we will see in our work life, personal lifestyle, just an example or two, and something that maybe is just a passing phase, just we're seeing it just now. Eventually when we reopen, we'll just go back to the office, it'll be the same. Would it be that way? That's the first quick question. And the second quick question is, in terms of reopening parts of the economy, do you see the government implementing some of the big data techniques, procedures that we're seeing in other countries that Dr. Subhawood mentioned earlier about tracing and maybe isolating, tracking, using big data? And if so, I mean, how is government going to continue to manage and contain COVID-19 after reopening?
It's really hard to actually predict the future, even in good times, and in such a huge structural shift like this is even harder. So I would not pretend to be that person to be able to see out to the future. But at the very least, if you ask me about the company, my company is very young, and young in terms of the age of the company is also the age of the people working for this company. Everybody has a laptop. Even for us, it's a huge change. And we did start our working from home consideration at the very end of February, and therefore we have a few weeks to try and error and see what we can do and what we cannot do. Remotely. What we can do is certainly online discussions are more structured. What we cannot do is creative and collaborative work. It's still a challenge. But what I do know 100% is even after the opening, the lockdown has been eased, we will unlikely going back to 100% weekday office hours. So that's a lot of the thing that ways of work will change is certainly permanent. Another aspect that Dr. Subhawood has mentioned before is some of the industries, particularly the gray, the gray economy. Some of this has a huge public health impact, and the concern is now much more pronounced than what it has been before, and therefore these groups will certainly be impact much longer, even after the presence of vaccine and treatments. And therefore, we will start to see how the economy will move along without the functioning side of the functioning gray economy and the shadow economy like this. In terms of the large corporate, a lot of large corporates are going online and become contactless. One of the concerns that we've seen is in the last 2 or 3 decades, the design for corporate balance sheets is to look at a lean corporate balance sheet, and therefore a lot of the company don't have cash on hands lying around. And a long lockdown will not just have the impact on a small company, but also from a large corporates as well, because of the the accounting standards and the way they manage that liquidity in the last few decades. So going forward, a lot of people will start to rethink about the way to manage the financial sense of the company, and that will have a severe impact on the security of the distribution, of the centralized and decentralized distribution. Another thing that I would like to highlight is also with this, not just lockdown, but also the importance of testing, tracing, and isolation and information for the healthcare management. We start to look back into the old traditional way to look at data. Single gateway, centralized data system, ability to looking at to utilize big data, machine learning, and all these come at an expense of privacy concern that in not so distant past has been a major drive among policymakers. So we have yet to see how this privacy concern is going to take a backseat and give way to a more centralized data gathering and centralization of analytics and accumulation of data going forward.
Thank you very much. I'll just say this to our viewers. If the speakers or the moderator, myself, if we're looking to the side or looking down, it's not because we're doing anything. So we're just reading the comments and questions and we're taking down notes. You see, think about doing this online and through the screen and camera. You have a lot of externalities and people wonder what's happening. So we have a lot of notes and there's some questions coming in now. I'm going to take some questions and comments now. So please feel free to post them on the ISEAS Thailand Facebook. In the meantime, just a couple of issues going forward. Dr. Subodh and Dr. Sutapa, both of you, I'm thinking, what kind of, 1997, 1998, it took 2, 3, 4 years, about 2, 3 years to kind of recover. The Thai economy reached its pre-1997 level by the early 2000s, right? So this time, are we looking at a V shape? Can we expect a sharp contraction and then a big bounce? There's a question from a teacher named Andy here. Can we expect a rebound next year based on year-on-year basis? So if this year contracts a lot, next year it will expand some, and then we can expect maybe things to normalize in 2022. Would that be the case? Or are we looking at longer-term recovery before, and maybe thinking of pre-COVID might not be the right framework to look at economic recovery in Thailand and elsewhere. It might be that the recovery will be kind of upward sloping and then a bit plateaued and up again, and then it might be a different kind of recovery, not a straight shot like 1997, 1998, and thereafter, or even 2008, 2009. Would this be the case? My second point, I think, some countries, could it be that the sooner, in terms of competitiveness of nations, would it be better for countries to reopen sooner if they can manage to contain and have control measures in place to keep COVID-19 down? Is there an advantage to reopening sooner among nations, like say Thailand, Southeast Asia? China is doing that now, and it could be that they might have a first mover, first reopener advantage. Could this be the case? Dr. Subodh?
Well, let me try to answer your questions by relating them to what I would think are the 6 challenges that are facing Thailand in the coming months and years. And in response to your earlier question, I think there's a good chance that we will get a W type of a recovery, particularly if there could be a second wave of infections, particularly from the developed countries during their winter. Come early next year, and that's a concern. But having said that, let me list down some of the things that I see, the timeline that I see going the next 2, 3, 4 years. Number one, the most important thing is, are we going to have a delay in reopening Thailand, in lifting the lockdown? my sense is that if you delay the easing of the lockdown, the economic cost of that semi-shutdown will rise at an exponential rate because people are running out of money, getting desperate. SMEs are having problems. So I think that's something that's very important for Thailand over the next few weeks. If for some reason or other, we don't get a good reopening and a revival of certain sectors, we could be in for some very strong negative feedback loop, both economic and political. Now, the second point is this: even if we do a pretty good job domestically, there is no guarantee that external demand will come back, because it looks to me like the other countries around the world are suffering much more than we are. And they are the ones who might have to delay their reopening. And to the extent that our export is about 50-some% of GDP, not to mention tourism, the shortfall in demand, in external demand, could still be quite crippling for the Thai economy. The third point is in regards to the service sector in particular, which at the moment, as you know, had always been the main engine of growth. It had risen from 5% of GDP to almost 12% of GDP until now. This sector needs to be revived and restructured in a huge, huge way, right? You cannot have crowded flights, small hotels, and lots of tour buses anymore where you're packing so many people in. It looks to me like you really have to think about chartered flights, taking in clusters of certified people that you know are very healthy. You might have planes that you're self-serving yourself, no flight attendants, just to minimize any risk. And you will have secure tours, traveling to certified places, for example. Those things require a lot of technology, a lot of connectivity. And there's a lot of room to make, I think, to make changes and to make money there. That would be point number 3. Point number 4, we've had 5 viruses in the past 20 years. Some had not been severe. You know, you've had SARS, you've had the equivalent of a Spanish flu in terms of the swine flu, you've had the bird flu, you have MERS, you've had obviously even Ebola. So my concern is that going forward, you might have another 5 years, another virus. And that's something that relates to how could you build public health capabilities to hopefully foresee and try to mitigate any future pandemics. That's something that relates to my other point in terms of, therefore, how would the global supply chain look? It would mean that people will be much more reluctant, firms will be more reluctant to have a global supply chain, or at least have a much smaller global supply chain, just to minimize that risk. Therefore, countries that have good public health credential could in fact be allowed to join this exclusive club of the global supply chain. And in that way, Thailand could look good. In answer to your earlier question, that if we emerge out of this lockdown faster than others and show our ability to contain new infections, it means we have that public health credential to join the new global supply chain. But finally, there's also the point relating to what our existing assets are and how productive they are. For example, we'll have lots of hotels, lots of airlines, lots of planes. These planes used to carry maybe 300-400 passengers. Now you're going to force them to carry 100 passengers, 150 passengers, right? Even closer to home, the elevators at my office, it says you could pack 20 people in, right? But under the current circumstances, they delineated about 6 spaces. So there's a lot of need to deal with all these assets that are going to be low return now, provide very low returns now. How do you reinvest and expect and live with low returns on asset. I think those will be some of my points going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shepard. That's very helpful and very forward-looking. You know, we have a lot of adverse numbers. I mean, there are a lot of alarming numbers on industries, different sectors, the virus itself. I think also the virus is so murky. I mean, the one bottom line is that we don't know how the virus itself is going to meander, how it's going to evolve, you know, in rolling waves of infections across towns and countries and continents. So it still has a long way to run. However, I do think that when a vaccine is found, I just wonder when a vaccine is found, what will happen? Would that be a virus stopper and people would be more assured and some normality would return? That's just one consideration. Eventually, there will be a vaccine. And, you know, of course, it will be costly. It's not going to be cheap and it's not easy to mass vaccinate. But the notion, the existence of a vaccine, I think will give a lot of psychological comfort to a lot of people. Well, from what you said, Dr. Supawut, this is a call for really a revamp, an overhaul of Thai economic growth strategies and how our entire mindset. So tourism is a good example. I mean, you know, for mass tourism, we might have to move to a more niche strategy, being more nifty about who we receive as visitors in Thailand. So, I mean, a lot of opportunities out of this crisis eventually, and some of those opportunities will be forced adjustments. I mean, these will be adjustments that are required, right? I'll just come to a couple of questions now. Dr. Suthapan, it's a direct question for you. I mean, from Michael Bach, and you know, is the Thai government doing anything to harness this opportunity to incentivize Thai companies to strengthen their digital capabilities and internal work cultures so that you know, you can work from home? It could change sort of the work-life balance. A question I'll take from Dr. Pavita Pananondan. Thailand has long relied on export-led development that sees most of our firms integrate in global value chain as manufacturers and exporters. Being dependent on exports has made Thailand vulnerable in time of deglobalization, particularly when all other countries are looking at reshoring of production. How would this affect the economic development model of the Thai economy of Thailand going forward? So this, I think, two good questions on the maybe micro, macro. On a micro, you know, things will change. I mean, should the government be providing incentives for companies to become more digitalized, allowing workers to work more from home? Maybe that will lead to a greater productivity. There's a productivity question from Martin Bensky Starling in Chiang Mai. You know, productivity might take a different direction altogether. And then, so that's a micro. And then in a broader scheme, you know, we have been stuck in this so-called middle income trap for some time. And to get out of it, there's been a call, and this is, you know, repeated call for economic upgrading, you know, upskilling, reskilling, education reforms, and so on. It hasn't happened. Now, this crisis, with this kind of unemployment, would this keep Thailand mired in the middle income trap? Because labor will be cheaper, jobs will be harder to come by. This also will affect maybe migrant workers from Cambodia and Myanmar. Would they be needed back in the Thai economy if Thais don't have a job, right? So, I mean, you know, these are alarming questions, but I think we have to face them squarely in order to move on. So let me go first to Dr. Sutapa. What do you think in terms of micro work-life balance, productivity, business maybe shifting to more online, work from home, to the government be assisting them, incentivizing them? And then, you know, what Thailand's economic growth model will be in view that demand, global demand, is not the same anymore?
I think I would like to say that right now, I think the governments are also looking into the most immediate needs to the supply shock, which is to have a systematic, in control opening up of the economy, and I'm sure the incentive to incentive to help SME to adjust the business is also there, but I think it's my personal questions. This is not from the government sector or anything. What more incentive would a corporate need than the problem that they're facing right now to adjust their business, to make sure that they can handle the next episode of epidemic, if not the global pandemic that we see today. And as Dr. Subodh has mentioned, in the last 20 years, we see 5 epidemics. And therefore, in the next few years, we're probably going to see that again. And even if we start having the presence of vaccines when it becomes cheaply available or largely available to the public, we still brace ourselves and to be expected to see another outbreak like this coming in the next few years. So I think I realize that we have not talked much about the government trying to open up the countries. I want to recount what has been the discussions on the table so far. And I think one of the things is we need to set expectation about the opening up of the economy. What it means is we still don't know a lot about these outbreaks or about this coronavirus. And therefore, we don't know how it takes shapes, what kind of journey it will take us until we start having the first treatment on the table or eventually the vaccine. But what we know for now is the approach the Thai government has adopted is the hammer and dance, meaning that they start to see the stabilized number of new cases, the easing out the lockdown, and once the number is going up, they're going. So that's the dance part. When they start to see the numbers going up, then they hammer it again. So what we would expect to see is the sporadic, intermittent lockdown from one area to another. Another thing is any measure is not perfect because we don't know a lot about this coronavirus and we don't know a lot about how public responds to the open to the reopening of the economy, and therefore everyone is looking out on a way to keep changing the rules. And as you know, communicating the rules or the changing of the rules to the public is very difficult. So certain communication has a very one unified place to communicate, and very clear message is key to handle the situation. And we have to admit that the public sector have not done that well at the onset of this outbreak, and they are starting to learn that, and I hope that going forward that will become more improved. And then to control the outbreak, information is key, and that's the only thing. When Chinese government announced the Condon sanitaire, which is absolute lockdown, it's very clumsy. It's frightened people, and it breaks down the fundamental element of public health, which is information. To say that threatened with the lockdown, people just take flight, and the government no longer know what's going on. And I think since then, the Chinese government has taken a more nuanced approach, which fortunately for Thailand, we have learned from that, and we start with the nuanced approach. And we're looking at the situation now stabilized, then we start to reopen the economy, but we have not really invested in the collecting the data for regarding the opening up of the economy, and that's where the technologies come into play. So the two areas, the two main challenges for the opening of the economy. One is the tracing, and once the people are traced and tested, then they can be isolated. Only the people at risk. The rest can go into the economy. And another question is when we open up a lot of the formal and informal shops and small operators, how can we reinforce the new rules, the new public health rules to all those operators? And that's when the technology can help with public participation in terms of health monitoring and allowing all this business to open up and being properly monitored. So these are the key challenges where technologies can apply. I hope that it will be done with the experimental spirit in mind, other than just try to make this one big opening up and then it become the hammer comes sooner than we should anticipate. Then
Thank you.
another question is regarding the economic recovery that Dr. Suput mentioned, the shapes. I certainly agree. It will not be a smooth V shape for sure, and a lot of the old sectors will probably need to be changed forever. But one thing that we know is when the structural change like this happen, the distributional impact to the poorest part of the economy will suffer, and the income inequality would be wider, would be more severe. And if you look at the SME, they certainly need liquidity to weather this crisis. And even with the small firms, the number of companies that are vulnerable to liquidity shocks would double after about 2 months lockdown. So these are the urgent needs that the governments need to help. Another new, so with what we would see is certainly the market positions of a few tech platforms, which certainly be much stronger, and how would Thai society, particularly with we are adopter of those technologies, would come into, would be part of this interplay of more concentrated wealth or market power of the technology companies will remain to be seen. I would like to point out another kind of inequality that we have not discussed a lot about is we might see a new kind of inequality that may be emerging. There has been some debate on allowing people with immunity to re-enter economy or social activities, while others without the immunity are, have to stay in lockdown. And this is I don't have the answer, but I feel that this is a moral question, no less than the public health itself, because we as a society have to ask ourselves whether we're ready for two-tier society. The most telling example is probably in school, where schools generally are perceived and serve as a social equalizer. Regardless of your macroeconomic background, when you enter school, you stay in line, and you're being distributed tasks or chores equally. Now some kids are being allowed back in school because they have not been exposed to the virus. And what kind of incentive structure or learning insight are we making out of this is also what's the questions the society need to ask before making that into law.
Thank you very much. I'll just pick up on that last point about inequality, and I'll go to Dr. Suput now. The question about, if exports are not going to be the locomotive for Thai economic growth, and what can we be looking at for the Thai economy to grow and expand? And do you think that the government's fiscal rescue package is not really a stimulus package, is more like a stabilization package to me? 1.9 trillion baht, is that going to be sufficient for the requirements at hand, for the crisis that we're seeing? And if not, or if yes, what do we do about the kind of inequality that could worsen? I'll note that the government has asked the 20 wealthiest individuals and families in Thailand to provide some plans about how to mitigate, how to help Thai society. So we'll see what they have to say. But what do you think? What do you think about the stabilization package, 1.9 trillion baht, economic upgrading, middle income trap? How can the Thai economy expand if exports are not the way forward?
Well, on the export side of things, I think as I said, my concern is that if the global lockdown continues, that would suppress global demand, and our export recovery will just be that much harder to engineer. That's out of our hands. But if you look at things in the longer term, as I mentioned just now, there will be a downsized, much more compact global supply chain given the risk from this pandemic. And as I mentioned before, I believe that therefore you need to have strong public health credentials to be able to remain attached to that new global supply chain. And I think Thailand does have the public health credentials to be able to do that. So in that way, longer term, I'm optimistic that if we can show the world that we have been able to contain this pandemic very well in Thailand, that we could reopen the economy and still keep the number of new infections down, that's pretty much a very important endorsement of our ability to maintain economic normalcy in times of severe public health crisis elsewhere. Therefore, we would deserve to have a place in the global supply chain. You have to earn your ability to go back into that global supply chain. So I'm not closing that option off in my view. The other part that you mentioned, which I thought was quite interesting, was about the labor issue. Yes, we are a country that has aging population, and therefore, what do we do? How do we manage the supply of labor from neighboring countries? I would believe that here is where, again, public health credentials, if we could establish that, would be very important. Can we, in fact, allow the participation of labor from neighboring countries in such a way that we can still contain any infection in Thailand? Can we do a good proactive tracing, testing, tracing, isolating, and treating foreign labor in such a way that you can continue as much as we can to allow foreign labor to fill in the shortfall that we will have in the next 10, 20 years in terms of labor supply. If we could do that, we become the center, the economic center of the region that shows the ability to withstand the next pandemic. And you can have a premium. There's a premium to be able to achieve something like that. We already have some sort of a niche, if you will. We could argue that we are a place where you could have good food, clean food. We have good medical tourism. You can build on that. So in that way, those things I think are opportunities going forward for Thailand. At the end of the day, let me just end my remarks by saying this. We must make COVID-19 look like a disease, not the disease that you are neglecting everything else. If we could say we are a country that will serve the wellness of the world in all respects, I think that's where our new niche would be.
Thank you very much, Kap. I like that part about tourism, medical tourism, and how coronavirus should be a disease, not the end all, not the apocalyptic outcome that ends everything, but in fact, there can be ways forward. And in fact, we have just a last round or two. I want to emphasize, I mean, we can go on and on about negative numbers. There are a lot of alarming figures and ominous scenarios. Things are not looking great for the Thai economy, for the world economy, and so on. But we're also interested in not just what's going wrong, what has gone wrong, but also what we could do to make it right. So I think that how we can get back on the right track. One thing I think has come out of this discussion, and Dr. Support has mentioned about travel and tourism. I think tourism, even in medical tourism, and the quality emphasis, I think is one example that we can think about a way forward, one way forward. I'll just mention a couple of comments and questions here. We've covered some of this already, but I want to promote audience participation as we would in person. There's a comment from Mr. Von Companel. Could you comment on the impact of the government's stimulus package? We've discussed that somewhat, and the BOT's financing strategy. We could cover a bit, the BOT's strategy and the budget for shoring up corporate debt and so on. What the impact this would be on business and liquidity conditions. Former ambassador from Australia, James Wise, says, can a government that asked the 20 richest Thais to help to revive the economy also initiate reforms to introduce more competition into the economy, which may help Thailand out of the middle income trap? So basically, the concern that seeking assistance from the richest may incur the risk of growing inequality and unfair playing field. And then I'll just take this question from Kun Surasak Pimpasing, who works in property development, and he asked, would you forecast, how do you see the property development sector? And we can see that there's going to be maybe a glut. I mean, a lot of projects that have been ongoing now are facing a pretty bleak demand going forward. What's the outlook for the property sector? So perhaps we can take some of these questions on board. Dr. Sutapa, I'll come to you first.
On the BOT strategy?
BOT financing strategy, corporate debts.
I certainly look at the strategy that BOT's released out in the last few weeks into two groups. One is to show up liquidity for the corporate debt, and that's to basically to build confidence and to make sure that any blip in confidence in particular asset class will not spread to others. I think that has been quite effective, and how effective it depends on how we foresee this pandemic will last. Right now, it has been to be able to contain the concern, and if the situations remain in this regard, as Dr. Subud has said, the Thai public health seems to be doing a pretty good job, and is show a real effort in maintaining that going forward. So the confidence may not be problematic so much into the future from the public health perspective. So that depends on how soon we can reopen the economy, how the life can return to semi-normalcy. The second part is more of a stimulus, and I would say more stabilizer than stimulus, as Dr. Thitinan has mentioned. Is not. I would not say it's not enough, but I would say it's not very clear, and it's not so much about what the BOT has done, but also as a stimulus package as a whole. When you announce a package like that, the most important thing is access, and the time to cash is the most important thing in the minds of the consumer who are cash-strapped. And that part of communication and the rules of access can be improved, can certainly be improved. And that's also applied to the SME soft loans. I think the criteria has to be very, very simple. They don't have to be very discriminatory at this point, because there are it's very likely that majority of the business will be affected by this, and therefore they should have a simple rules that allows a smaller groups of people can access to this stimulus program.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Would you have something to say, Dr. Subud, about the BOT's strategy? I mean, in terms of handling this economic crisis. The repurchase rate has been lowered, the benchmark rate to now just not even 1%, 75 basis points now, very low. And then the BOT monetary policy seems hamstrung in terms of coming to the rescue. and then they have this financing of the corporate debt. What do you think?
Well, I think if you look at the totality of macroeconomic policy, which is the government package as well as the Bank of Thailand package, I would argue this. The Bank of Thailand, what it's trying to do is to basically maintain present ownership of companies. Think about it. Look at the bond fund. I'll just call it easy. I'll just call it simply the bond fund. It basically say that, hey, if a corporate were to have to roll over its bonds and could not roll it over, there's a facility there to bridge the loan, to have a bridging loan to make sure that you can roll over your bonds. What does that actually do? It makes sure that you don't go bankrupt, right? You don't default on the bond and you don't get your company in trouble. You maintain integrity, the status quo of that company. Why? Because then the company can survive to live another day and to produce and to pay employees and to increase GDP when you open that lockdown. And that's all it is. The same thing applies to the Bank of Thailand's SME loan package. It basically says, SME, I'll lend you more money so you can survive while you're not producing, while you're not able to actually pay wages from revenue. I'll give you some loan to pay your employees to stay put. So again, it's something to put the economic assets of the country in place while this lockdown is happening, so that when you release the lockdown, these companies can go back and hopefully survive. So look at it in that context. Even the government spending side, most of it is about a cash handout to people who suddenly don't have wages anymore. Again, make sure people survive so that once you open up the economy, they can go back and be gainfully employed again. So everything, almost everything, is about, I'm going to put everyone on life support while I'm locking down the economy. That's why, to me, reopening the economy is so critical. Without reopening the economy, all this will come to waste. The only portion of the government spending that is relatively forward-looking is that fund, I think 500 billion baht, to say that, well, once things improve, various agencies can propose projects for a committee to approve to boost the economy. So the only real sort of post-COVID part of the package is that a fund that they set up that would require some sort of a bottom-up proposal from agencies to a committee that would require cabinet endorsement. My concern with that fund is that this is a time for top-down thinking. How do you restructure the Thai economy top-down? So I would have thought that you would want to have a top-down strategy that is told to everyone. Everyone sort of knows. Then the bottom-up can present these proposals when and if it happens in a way that conforms with this top-down strategy that you have outlined, which could, as I said, in my view, I hope Thailand to be reconfigured in a way that we would be the wellness center of the region. Wellness in all respects. You come to Thailand, you know the public health system is great. You could have a good, healthy tourism. You have good food, healthy food, and so on and so forth. Again, that leaves a lot to the imagination of the Thai entrepreneurs. They have to really fill in the substance. I'm going to give only the skeleton of what I think we could redesign ourselves to be. But it's really up to the ingenuity and dynamism of the Thai entrepreneurs to roll with the punch and then try to come back with new ideas based on a broad strategy that the government should outline for us going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, there are a few more questions, and I apologize we cannot cover all the questions and comments. But this webcast it is being recorded and it can be viewed subsequently. And we've had a lot of viewers who went back to it for the last 2 webcasts. Let me use this remaining time as a last round to go to our 2 economists and just say and ask, one theme that has emerged. I mean, we're looking at this pandemic, coronavirus. This is an enormous disruption. And we don't even know the course that remains to be run is still ongoing, unfolding, and it can still wreak a lot of havoc. It can also recur. There could be multiple waves, second wave, third wave, and it could roll across countries and continents. So there's a lot that we don't know. The unknowns are very dangerous and I think ominous. However, I think that at the same time, as being a great disruption, it's also a great, it could lead to a great restructuring. I mean, as far as Thailand is concerned, what Dr. Supawut, I think, has said is one way to put it. This is a great time to reorder the Thai economy, the structure of Thai businesses, but it requires some forward thinking. And in a way, it's almost we've been given almost a new slate, not quite a blank slate, but a new slate to do things right, or to do things that Thailand should be doing, long time ago. But this is an opportunity, a catalyst. So I'll just come to our speakers now, Dr. Sutapa and Dr. Supawut. I'll just come to Dr. Sutapa. A couple of questions, issues. One, if you can draw out a timetable, just very roughly. I mean, can we, a lot of people will be tuning in, listening. A lot of people want to know when can we expect some life and livelihood back? Maybe late this year, sometime next year. So that's a very quick question on life and livelihood and about time frame to return to a semblance of normality. And second is, in the big scheme of things, redoing, restructuring, reordering Thai economy. What were your first 2 or 3 areas that you would focus on first, Dr. Sutapa?
In terms of timetable, I'm sure all the government agencies are actually looking into how to open up the economy in an orderly manner. And we certainly want to set the right expectations that this is going to be some kind of hammer and dance approach, meaning that the expectation that the stabilizing numbers of the new COVID cases is going to go up temporarily, and then it will come down again through some kind of stricter measurement, and then they'll be easing up again. So the public should be prepared for that and see that as a part of learning as we go. Nobody wants to have a very a strong absolute lockdown that's seriously damaging to society. In terms of the timeline to the livelihood, as we mentioned for the last hours, there's some part of economy will be much slower to return, if at all. For example, hospitality business, real estates will be certainly suffer, and all the tourism industries and healthcare industries. We have to rethink of the way we are approaching all the value proposition that we're going to give to the customers. I would say that the timeline will really depend on the treatment that become readily available to the larger public. I would expect that treatment will come, I'm no expert in this, but I would believe the treatment will come faster than vaccine. And therefore, any kind of promising treatments that would help easing or help treating the people who have been affected by this will bring back, will expedite our ability to go back to some kind of normalcy. In terms of reordering Thailand or restructuring, I think this is a very good time, and as you say, this is not a clean slate. It's not to be perceived in a positive light so much, but I would say that it's also an opportunity to really look closely at or asking questions of what we would have done differently in the past? How would we, I think crises also bring out your strength and point out the weaknesses. And therefore, it's time to re-strategize your business, competitiveness of Thailand, and also looking at a way to care more about security as opposed to relying a lot on interconnectedness of the economy as we have done full swing in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Sutapa. Dr. Supawut, you mentioned already a little bit about tourism and niche tourism. Maybe another area or two. I think if you were to, if we were to kind of restructure and let's say call it great restructuring, what would be the couple of areas we could focus on?
I think that you do have to allow the economy to open up and let the chips fall where they may lie. The private sector, the hotel owners and others will try. You'll have to let their ingenuity drive the restructuring, it seems to me, at least in this short term, while the public sector, in particularly the public health sector, must be able to support the economy by making sure that they do their jobs, which they have done very well in terms of keeping the new infections low. If we could have that happen, I think the Thai private sector can figure it out. I'm sorry, I would like to answer that question that was raised about the property sector. I have to admit that the property sector in the short term faces very important constraints because it was the demand for condominiums in particular was about 20% from foreign buyers. So when you have a lockdown like this, suddenly 20% of the demand for the property sector disappears. So everyone's facing a cash crunch. And once that happens, obviously the developers have to discount. And once you discount one group discounts a condo, the rest of the others will also find their prices go down. So you have a very difficult time for the property sector in this short term. But over the longer term, if the government can do its job properly, and as I said, reinvent Thailand as this wellness center for the world, then property prices will go back up again. The point is, can we make Thailand look like this, I would call safe sanctuary for the rest of the world, for the rest of Asia, knowing that they are going to be relatively secure if there's another pandemic were to hit. So I would try to capitalize on this very low rate of infection that we are experiencing right now, which is probably one of the best in the world. And also the very low fatality rate, again, among one of the best in the world. And see if we could do this, continue this while opening up the economy. The challenge is coming. Can you keep this great public health record while opening up the economy? If you can, the value of Thai property will go back up.
Thank you very much. In fact, we have a plan to do a public forum online with public health officials and policymakers, so that will be coming up. And also we have a session coming up on Thai politics during and after COVID-19, so please stay tuned. We have to see about speaker availability, and then I'll make the announcement and you'll hear from us about when those events will be. In the meantime, I really want to thank Dr. Sutapa Amornviwatt, Dr. Supawut Saichira for being with us, for sparing your expertise, your time, your valuable time. I know that you had to run around with online meetings and doing this and that, and just to carve out this hour and a half in the afternoon to be with us. Thank you very much on behalf of all the audience members, and also there will be members who will be tuning in later. So from all of us, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you. And to all the viewers, thank you very much. And we look forward to having you join again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're glad to be here. Thank you.